And the rest of us, we're going to flip ahead to 1 Samuel chapter 10. 1 Samuel chapter 10. We've made it to chapter 10. Last week, if you remember, so 2 weeks ago, we ended with Samuel had a message, and last week was the message from Samuel to Saul. And so Saul now knows that he's going to be king. Now, I don't know about you, and I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this, and we're going to kind of see it pop up in the character of Saul. It's actually one of the good things about Saul is Saul, at least in the beginning, seems to be quite the humble guy, and that's kind of what you want in a leader, right? You want someone, they always say that, right? You don't want the people that are grabbing at power, but the people who have it reluctantly thrust upon them. And that seems to be Saul in this particular instance. Because I've heard it said, too, right? Like, people get all amuck and all upset about elections all over, whether it's Canada or the U.S., and people say, well, we need to start screening these people to make sure they're not crazy. And I said, well, in that case, no one will ever run, because you have to be crazy to want that kind of a job. And we're going to get into that as we get into what exactly it's going to entail for Saul. But it starts off with this. So Samuel gives them the message, and then immediately after giving the message, hey, you're going to be king, and this is what it will entail, Samuel takes a flask of olive oil and pours it on Saul's head and kisses him, saying, has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance? First thing I love about this, God's appointing a king, but guess what? It's still God's. He never relinquished control. What is it? It is God's inheritance. Not Saul's. This doesn't belong to Saul or Saul's family. This doesn't belong to even to the people of Israel. This is God's inheritance. This is God's kingdom, and it will continue to be so. Saul is merely a manager or a steward of this particular kingdom. He is taking a role, but he is not the sovereign over all. In fact, God still holds that role to this day. He is Lord of all. And it says, when you leave me here today, you will meet two men near Rachel's tomb and at Zelzah on the border of Benjamin. And they will say to you, the donkeys that you set out to look for have been found. And now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. And he is asking, what shall I do about my son? So you'll go on from there. This is interesting, by the way. So we're going to read a whole chunk here, which is just Samuel dictating to Saul what's about to happen. You're going to go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men are going up to worship God at Bethel. We'll meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, one 3 loaves of bread, another a skin of wine. They will greet you and then offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept. Remember, they've run out of provisions, and now he's on his journey home. So he's got nothing left. Even though they just ate here, they're probably going to be pretty hungry, because if you remember from the beginning of Saul's story, Saul went on a wide journey looking for these donkeys. And so now he's got a big journey home. After that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost, an outpost of your enemy, Saul. And as you approach that town, you're going to meet a procession of prophets coming down from a high place with lyres, timbrels, pipes, and harps being played before them. And they will be prophesying. And the Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hands find to do, for God is with you. So go ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. But if you must wait 7 days until I come to you, but if you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do. Okay, so this is just Samuel saying, okay, imagine this. He's giving a lot of detail. So much so that certainly any one of us would certainly be very, very intimidated to try and give this level of detail. But this is certainly the relationship that Samuel has with God, right? That God uses him as, remember, a prophet doesn't just mean foretelling, although in this case, it does include foretelling. Prophecy just means he's speaking for God, and God is saying, I'm going to make these things happen. Something else that's interesting in this is that it says you will be changed into a different person. Now, what does that mean? I want to point out, if you remember in our story before in chapter 9, when Saul shows up and meets Samuel for the first time, Samuel, who is effectively at this point the high priest. Samuel, who has effectively been the high priest for many years. Saul didn't recognize him. Now you would think in all of Israel, the most recognizable person would be the high priest, because where are they commanded to go every single year? They're meant to make pilgrimage back to the tabernacle, back to the ark, so that they can make their sacrifices every single year to remember, right, the Exodus out of Egypt. So either Saul didn't take it very seriously. So Saul would have known the story. Saul would have known these things, but he clearly didn't know the players involved. He clearly, he for whatever reason, he wasn't that pious of a man. And he didn't really know these things. And yet it says that he is going to be changed into a different person. And I think as we get into it, so would you. Verse 9, as Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart, and all of these signs were fulfilled that day. Now, I wanted to pause on that because some people say, see, this is a lack of free will. God took Saul's heart and changed it. Now, I want to ask you this. Any of you that have ever been married, when you first met your spouse and you say something like, they took my breath away, or they swept me off my feet, did they actually do that? No, they didn't. It's an expression, a way of indicating how you felt, your emotion in relation to that. Right? When we say that God changes Saul's heart, I don't think God, went in and physically changed the way that Saul felt about things, but instead, because of this encounter, remember, this all started by Saul looking for donkeys, and then he's just had prophecy after prophecy begin to be fulfilled in front of him. He's just witnessing all of these things in a row that are changing, and suddenly I think he's beginning to realize, wait a minute, this God who brought us out of Egypt, he is still here, he's still active, and he is, he is this good God that my dad's been telling me about. I think Saul is starting to change into a different man, and for a good reason, not because God of anything God is physically doing to him, but because of Saul's own revelation of what is happening around him, witnessing what God has done for him and to him. And it says all of these signs were fulfilled that day. When he and his servant arrived at Gibeah, remember this is the first thing that Samuel said, a procession of prophets met him. This was the second thing. The prophets met him, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he joined them prophesying. And when all those who had formerly known him saw him prophesying with the prophets, they asked each other, "What is this that has happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" A man who lived there answered, "And who is their father?" And it became a saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" After Saul stopped prophesying, he went up to a high place. Now Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, "Where have you been?" So this was the first thing. Remember, he said, you're going to run into some people over by Rachel's tomb. So here he is. He's on his way towards the high place, which is the last thing he told him about. And he runs into his uncle and his uncle's servant, two men. "Where have you been?" "Looking for donkeys," he said. "But when we saw that they were not found, we went to Samuel." Saul's uncle said, "Tell me what Samuel had said to you." So Saul replied, "He assured us that the donkeys had been found," but he did not tell his uncle what Samuel had said about the kingship, right? And now, this has been interpreted a few different ways. Depending on the preacher, depending on the commentary you read, some people say this is, whether the way I look at it is this, right? Some people say, he didn't want it, or he was trying to avoid the will of God, or something like this, or some are saying he was just testing. And to me, I think the testing makes more sense, right? If you're a human being, and suddenly God has spoken this amazing thing, right? Samuel's given him this amazing message, and he wants to see, wait a minute, if I don't change any of the details, if I don't do anything to alter things in my way, are things still going to continue to happen and continue to come true the way that Samuel said? I think that seems to me to be more likely. I'm not pretending that I'm right above all else, but as I read just the plain reading of the Bible and I read this story, that's kind of what I see here. I see a man who's waiting to watch everything unfold exactly as Samuel has said. And so instead of telling his uncle about what Samuel had told him that he's going to be king, he's waiting. So Samuel summoned the people to Israel to the Lord at Mizpah, and he said to them, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt. I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But now you've rejected your God who saves you out of all of your disasters and calamities. And you have said, no, appoint a king over us. So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans. Why does he say it like this? It's time to pick a king. Of course, little does the rest of Israel know, a king's already been picked. But I absolutely love how this goes down. Like, this is just once again shows you just we did a thing with the kids this week at Trinity Kids where they had to try and draw out the balls in a sequence. We worked out the odds. I can't remember what it was. What was it, like 1 in 48 or something like that? Like, chance that they were actually going to get it right. It wasn't very good, so none of the kids ended up getting all of the sequence correct, right? Because they had to draw out 3 balls in a certain order. And so what happens? Israel brings forward the tribes, and it says, verse 20, when Samuel had all of the tribes come forward, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. So they cast lots, and they said, okay, which tribe should have our king? And Benjamin was chosen. And if you remember, Saul's from the tribe of Benjamin. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken, his family. And then finally, Saul, the son of Kish, by lot, by casting lots, by drawing straws, by however it was that they decided to do it, right? But it was all seemingly by chance, but of course God was intervening. Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, has this man come here yet? And the Lord said, yes, he has hidden himself amongst the supplies. So they ran and brought him out, and he stood there amongst the people. He was a head taller than any of the others. And Samuel said to all the people, do you see this man? Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him amongst all the people. So then the people shouted, long live the king. So this is an interesting situation. Where is he? He knows he's going to be picked king. Right, all these lots are being cast and things are happening. He already knows what the answer is going to be. Right, Samuel's already anointed him to be king. He's already been chosen. Do you think God's suddenly going to change his mind within the last 10 seconds? No, he's already made his mind. He already knows where he's going to go. But as I said before, you have to be crazy to kind of go after that kind of a job. And I think that's why we don't see a Saul who's kind of standing up there getting ready to just run up and be excited to cheer it on. Because not only does he realize, yes, he's going to be given an immense amount of power, but suddenly upon him is going to be thrust a huge amount of responsibility. He is now going to be responsible for the defense of an entire nation. He's going to be responsible to make sure that all of the people are cared for. He is going to be the human version of God ruling over Israel. That's a bit terrifying. That's a bit much. And it's why I think people, if we're going to have our elections the way we do, then clearly that is why only crazy people run after that, because man, that is a lot. That's a lot of responsibility. That's a heavy weight to hold. And as I said, Saul has a great start, and he starts off a humble man and a good man. Then Samuel explained all the rights and duties of the kingship. We already read about those. And he wrote them down on a scroll, and he deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people to go to their own homes. So Saul also went to his home in Gibeah, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. But some scoundrels said, how can this fellow save us? And they despised him and brought him no gifts. But Saul kept silent. There we have it. The king has been chosen, and the new era for Israel is about to begin. An era where, if you remember, that their enemy is still sitting on their doorstep. Yes, God has been doing great things and defending them, and they've been able to respond in kind, but now comes a time where they're going to finally have to push back. Right? That's one of the things that God said, is God said about the king that he's going to have to come, and he's going to not only defend you against your enemies, but you're going to have to actually go and actually take the rest of the promised land. Now, for any of you who know the rest of the story, you know that's not going to be Saul. But he starts off trying. And it was funny, I was sitting here talking to well, not here, but at the house, talking to Rebecca, and I was like, man, there's 3 big points that I love about this story that I think is so important, and I'm like, I don't know which one I ultimately should really focus on. And I think and we talked about it because I feel like that's the best way for people to think. A lot of people think they think in their heads, but you don't think in your head. You think out loud when you speak. That's why we got to have room for people to make mistakes and say silly things, because we all say silly things because we think silly things, and then we say the silly thing and we go, wait, that was a silly thing, and then we get ourselves corrected and we make ourselves. Have you ever thought, all of you, I see some smirks, but you know that because you've thought something, you thought that is so profound, and then you say it and you give it some life and you go, what was that nonsense I just uttered? I can't believe I thought that was amazing. We've all done it. I try my best to make sure I don't do it when I'm standing here, let me tell you. That's why I have these conversations with Rebecca all week long. But one of the most profound things I loved about this is, right, God has a plan. And God saw that plan through. And as long as Saul was willing to go along with it, as long as Saul was willing to accept that guidance, right, he said that these things would happen as you were journeying on your way. Guess what? Saul could have decided, you know what? I'm not going to go past this outpost because I don't want to see this. I don't want to be a part of your plan, God. I don't want to do these things. But he also recognized that, you know what? If God is sovereign, if God is king, then I want to see this play out. I want God to be the ruler of my life. And I keep coming back to that because I think that is one of the biggest lessons that we learn out of the beginning of the book of Samuel is, who are we living for? Because God came powerfully upon Saul. And for any of you who have ever had the Holy Spirit come upon you, then you can understand why that would change a man's heart, why that changes somebody. Because when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, there is no denying the power and the sovereignty and the grace of God. When the power of the Holy Spirit comes upon you, if you don't leave that experience saying, wait a minute, surely there is a God, I can't believe doubt would have ever entered my mind, then I would submit then you probably didn't have a real experience of God. Because when you have that Holy Spirit just fall on you, speak to you, talk to you, guide you, lead you, use you to prophesy, there's nothing like it. Now, I also want to point out, for some people, that because this is a thing, there are people that are like, wait a minute, but that hasn't happened to me. Has God not chosen me for anything special? God chose Saul. Not all the other people in this story. There's a lot of other people going on in this story. God chose Saul. Do I think God can use you? Do I think God will use people that are willing to put themselves before them? And absolutely, I think whomever is willing, the Holy Spirit can and will fall upon you if you make yourself available. But are you? Is the question. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I know a plumber is a plumber because he goes around and he does plumbing things. And I should know that a Christian is a Christian because they go around and they do Christian things. I've said it to Rebecca. I've had conversations with people before, and they were so proud of the fact that they were able to maintain these friendships. And one day it just came up as a surprise to their friends. They're like, wait a minute, you're a Christian? Oh, I had no idea. They're so proud of that fact. And I said, no, that means you're not living it right. It should be obvious to every single person in your life. Who is the priority? Is it God? It was obvious to the people that day. All the people who witnessed Saul and saw how Saul, he made the decisions he made because he knew that was the will of God. Right? He could have changed his mind. He could have altered his course. He could have chose something different. He didn't have to show up to was it Mizpah? I forget the name of it already. He didn't have to show up to Mizpah when he knew what was about to happen. But he did. Because he wanted to be in the will of God. So do you? Do you want to be in the will of God? Are you willing to make those same choices and sacrifices, quite frankly? Because a lot of times, walking in the will of God means you got to give something up. And it sucks, and sometimes it's painful. But in the end, why did God give us any of the commandments? Why did God give us any of the, and we were talking about this, man, I can't remember, was this with Trinity Kids? I think it was. We're talking to the kids, and it's like when God gives the 10 commandments, he doesn't say, I give you these 10 commandments because I want to rule over you with a strict set of laws, and this will allow me to maintain control over you. He says, no, I'm giving you these 10 commandments because if you follow these rules, then life is going to be so good for you. Right? This is what's going to bring you to prosperity. This is what's going to bring you goodness. This is what's going to bring you this all these wonderful things. It wasn't about earning their salvation. Never even then. It was always, always, always about the good life that God has prepared for you. So are you willing to go for it? Are you willing to start like Saul, but hopefully finish like Paul?